ChoralEd. Welcome to episode 43 of ChoralEd. I'm your host, Micah Bland. Thanks so much for watching. Today we're talking about standing formations. And if you've never played around with your ensemble's formation, you may be surprised at how different your choir can sound just by adjusting where certain singers stand in relation to each other. To start things off, we'll talk about two mixed formations I'm sure you're very familiar with. They are blocked and mixed. I misspoke there for a second. Blocked and mixed. So blocked is where various voice parts are grouped together. Mixed is where they are standing next to people who are not in their voice part. Blocked formation is very common. You may be familiar with several of these. As you see in the image here, we have left to right, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. There's also the option of soprano, bass, tenor, alto, where your basses and tenors are in the center. And then my personal preference and favorite is the sopranos on the left side in the front, behind them the basses, and then on the right side your altos, and behind them the tenors. I like the horizontal spread of the sections rather than the vertical columns, and that's just my personal preference. And I should also mention here that in this episode, it's all about personal preference and what you hear based on your desired choral sound and choral tone. So if you're not sure about your choral tone yet, and maybe you don't have a clear image of that, check out some of our earlier videos and our series on vocal tone and choral tone. Mixed formation has a lot of options. It could just be sporadically spread around, or there's kind of more of a structured approach where you have quartets, as you see here in the image, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and so forth. And so then you end up with columns of voice parts together. And that gives a mixed sound while still maintaining some support for maybe some struggling singers who need to hear someone else singing their voice part. So age of the singers, their confidence level can all affect if you want to do a mixed formation or a blocked formation. Some other considerations for blocked and mixed formation includes, is it polyphonic? It's argued that polyphonic music is better in a blocked formation, the reason being that each vocal part is its own melody, and so then the audience can clearly hear each voice part and their melodic lines separately, not kind of just mixed all together. Same could be true for a double choir work where you want to hear that antiphonal effect. So those are really important to have in a blocked formation. Mixed formation is argued to be better for homophonic and homorhythmic music, where the singers need to hear the other parts for intonation purposes. But with that being said, I've used mixed formations or attempted a mixed formation for homophonic music, and it sounded amazing. And I've used it for other songs that's more homophonic, and it just didn't work for whatever reason, right? And so just try things out, play around with it, see what sounds better. One may sound better, one may sound not as good, or you might not hear any difference at all. And then it becomes preference for the singers. Now, another approach that we'll talk about today is the voice matching technique. You may have seen this presented at a conference before. If you get a chance to see it demonstrated live, I'd love for you to please check it out. It's really cool to see live. In our demonstration video today, they will not be singing because it won't really translate with the acoustical environment, right, and then the recorded environment. So check it out live. What you'll see is the process of how that would work. So this voice matching process was developed by Weston Noble. And the goal here is to find the optimal blend of your ensemble, of your singers. It's also to avoid any problem voices that are going to clash. So sometimes voices just clash. Sometimes they help elevate and improve other voices. So a vibrato will clash with another vibrato and they just don't work. Intonation issues start occurring, whatever it may be. The goal here is to find the optimal blend by going through every possible standing formation combination. It sounds time consuming, it can be, but as you progress and develop your skills, I can get it down to 5 to 10 minutes per voice part, depending on how many singers you have. That's for about 6 singers in a section. So how does the process work? Step 1, you have all the singers in one section, just one voice part, sing individually, 3 or 4 measures, go down the row, and then you are listening for their tone, any intonation problems, the color of their voice, and you identify your ideal sound and the 2 voices that would sound the most homogeneous or similar together. And then step 2 is you'll bring those 2 singers together and you have them sing. You'll then have them switch spots, sing again, and you're listening for what variation, which of those 2 positions sounds better. Again, you're looking for the most similar homogeneous sound and your ideal tone. So maybe you want a brighter tone, maybe you want a darker tone. It's all personal opinion and personal preferences here. Let's pretend for this example that the first option was better. So I'll have them switch back. And then, in no particular order, you start adding in other voices and you're going to try every possible combination. The third singer will join. They stand. Oh, before I do that, let me also mention that with your starting 2 singers, you may need to switch one of them out, switch both of them out. Try different combinations first before you decide to stick with that combination. But you're going to start with 2, and then at that point, those 2 will never be split. So when you add the third voice, they'll stand on one side. I just typically start on the left, my left, their right. All 3 of them sing. You have them then stand on the other side of those 2 singers. All 3 of them sing. And then you select which one sounds the best. For this example, we'll pretend that the first one, when they're on the left of you, the director, their right, was the ideal option. And then you add in the 4th singer. They start on the left. They all 4 sing. They move over 1 spot. They all sing. Then they move over 2 spots. Again, we're not going to split those 2 initial singers. All 4 sing. For this example, we'll pretend that this last position was the best. And then you add in the 5th singer and then go through the whole process again jumping over the 2. And for this example, let's pretend that the 2nd position was the best. You can see how this could be a little time consuming. Sometimes you will immediately hear, that does not work. And that happens quite often where I'm like, oh, no, next, let's move on. I do it a little more gently and kind, but it's more like, oh, thanks, next, and we move on to the next position and so forth. You may also find that a voice fits in any position. And that's a good option because maybe you have them step out and then finish placing other people, and then you can kind of work them in. Maybe there's a different optimal blend, or they could kind of help buffer some problem tones and some problem issues in the voice. From there, if you need to have them in 2 rows, let's say you have 6 singers, you have 1 row and 3 of them in the back, 3 of them in front, they all sing together. You have them switch rows, back to front. You have them all sing together, and you pick which one sounds better. Now, when dividing them in half, it is possible that you end up with the 2 singers who shouldn't be split being right in the center. And so if you were to divide them in half, you would split those 2. You shouldn't do that. Avoid doing that because that's your core ideal sound that you want to maintain. And so you have to kind of readjust that. And I've had to do that before where I had to readjust the positioning so I could get those 2 singers together. And that's when you have your, optional person who can move around. That's when they can come and be advantageous to you to be moved to a different spot, same formation. So if you have a lot of singers, this may not be a viable option because as you kind of saw, with each addition of a singer, you're adding another repetition of doing it. So if you have 12 in a section, you're going to be doing it 11 times with 12 singers, 10 times with 11 singers, and so forth. That just adds up over time to be a lot. So your option then is to do a different approach that is popular, and that is placing similar tone colors together. So that's option 2. They sometimes call this flute and reed approach, or they identify these tones as flutes and reeds. So your lighter voices are placed in front, the front rows. Your darker, heavier voices are placed in the back rows, and then your moderate middle voices are in the center. There's various reasons why you might do this for placing the lighter voices in front, darker voices in back. That will be the radio choir approach, which we'll talk about next. And it has some effect there, I think, in why you place the lighter voices in front. But after doing that process, which is pretty fast, you can even do that from an audition, right? Before they even arrive in class. And from there, you can actually have each row. Let's say you have 4 singers in a row, and you have them in 3 rows, so that's 12 total. Well, then you can have those 4 singers do the voice matching process, so it's much shorter for each row instead of trying to do all 12 possibilities, which becomes a lot. So now you're just dealing with 3 possibilities when you just isolate 1 row each as their own voice matching process, if that makes sense, right? Instead of all 12 in 1 row, you're gonna have just the 1 row of singers for row 2, 4 people, row 3, 4 people, and you do a voice matching process for each of those rows separately. Now, talking about the radio choir approach, probably one you may not be familiar with, and there's probably a different term for it out there. I've always heard it referred to as the radio choir approach. In this method, you place your ideal sound, your best singers, up front in the very front row. This might seem very odd to many of you because you would think, well, I want to place those singers towards row 4 or 5 so they influence the rest of the choir. And if you have a beginning choir that's struggling, they lack some confidence, yes, I agree with that. Again, this is personal preference. But if you have an advanced choir, placing that ideal sound in the front row can be a positive impact on your sound. The reason it's called the radio choir is it was used for recording techniques. And you might know that the closer you are to the microphone, the louder the decibel level will be. This has to do with volume and decibel level as far as distance from the source. So if we double the distance from the source, we're reducing the decibel by 3. Again, if we double that, so if we're at 2 feet, we double that to 4 feet, we lose another 3 decibels, and that adds up a lot over time. 3 decibels is actually a significant amount. So if you're just ever so slightly closer to the microphone, well then you're naturally going to be louder in the microphone. Now you might say, well, we're not using mics, we're not recording, so why would this matter? Why would I choose to do this? Well, the same principle actually occurs in the auditorium with the listener. That because the front row is ever so slightly ahead of row 2, and even more of 3, and more of 4, more of 5, row 5, that their sound actually reaches the audience a hair, just a nanosecond, whatever it may be, before the other rows. And because of that their sound influences the overall sound that the audience hears. This will also be cause an effect for the masking effect, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. So that has another feature to deal with. In addition to kind of actual formations, there's some other concepts to be mindful of with standing formations. The first is called the self to other ratio, which talks about the distance between singers and what is the optimal distance of spacing. Not necessarily where they stand, but the spacing. Think with me for a moment. I probably said that weird and strangely there. Think with me for a moment about singing in a choir where you were shoulder to shoulder. You had 2 people right behind you, 2 people on your side. You probably couldn't hear anything. You couldn't hear your own voice very well. So what'd you do? Well, you oversang, you sing louder so you could hear yourself. This is an issue, for one, oversinging, but also not being able to monitor your own intonation, your own tone, and so forth. That's a big issue. So the self to other principle says the optimal distance is actually 3 feet between singers, You could do even more or less, and it's based on kind of the acoustical environment that you're in. But 3 feet is considered optimal. They say even a larger space between you and other singers for more acoustically dry environments and less space for acoustically live environments. So more reverb environments, like a giant cathedral. You can be closer together. But that's beside the point. Like I mentioned earlier, the distance, as you double the distance, well, that reduces the decibel level. So if you have someone right in your ear and you just move 1 foot, well, now that reduces it by 3 decibels. You move them to 2 feet, well, now that's 6 decibels, and that adds up very quickly. And so you are allowing the singer to hear themselves a little better. It also looks very nice on stage to be a little more spread out. It has a little more depth and breadth to your ensemble than just all crammed together, and there's plenty of riser space on the end. It just doesn't look as pleasant, in my opinion. Now, I also mentioned the masking effect, and this is a very helpful one and beneficial one. And it's also why the radio choir approach is significant and should be considered. The principle here is that as you place a singer towards the back and towards the interior of the ensemble, their voice is masked by the other sounds around them. So it's more difficult to identify that voice, to hear it. It's not sticking out as much. This can be to your advantage if you have a problematic tone. So someone who's really edgy, has a really kind of Broadway type thing. Well, you want to hide that tone. We want to fix that tone, but we don't have time to fix it. And so we're going to mask that voice by placing them more towards the center and towards the back. Again, with the radio choir, they're towards the front. There's no masking of that sound. If you place a problematic tone in the front, they will be heard, right? That is the least optimal place to put somebody with a problematic tone. Now, the masking effect helps with more singers. So if you have less than, let's say, 20 or so, it probably won't be as effective. But if you have 50 singers, well, you can easily hide several voices that are causing some problems. Now, a different type of problem may be inaccurate pitches or poor intonation. For these voices, it's suggested that you place them towards the outside of the ensemble. This way they don't influence the tuning and intonation of the rest of the ensemble. So again, it kind of seems contradictory. Like, one works for this and why don't you do that for the other one? And it's still personal preference. It may work for you. It may not work for you, right? These are all possibilities, all options. So try them out. Don't just stick with one and go with it all the time. Play around with it, make some changes, see what works best, what may work better for one song or 1 year or one group. It all can fluctuate. The last suggestion I want to make is about visual expressiveness. And there is a thought that placing the least visual expressive people towards the outside and the more visual expressive people towards the middle, this is where people tend to look more, is towards the center, towards the director. And so the thought there is that the less expressive people are towards the outside and not seen as well. Plus also, if they're curved a lot, they only see half of their face, right? Instead of their full face frontal view. You may also want to put a less expressive singer behind an expressive singer, or kind of hide them somehow next to an expressive singer. So as I mentioned before, and I've said throughout, it's a lot of personal preference. It's based on your own preferred tone, the sound that you want to hear from your ensemble. There's a lot of different options. One method doesn't work better than the other, and it may be different each year, and based on your own circumstances and needs. Maybe you have less confident singers, and so you need to place those stronger singers towards the back, so you can't do the radio choir approach. Whatever it may be, there are different options and different ideas to consider. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope you continue to inspire the future leaders of our world through this wonderful gift we call music. Thanks.